Hi, Alain. Um, Thank you for taking the call. I wanted to do this today to answer some questions that I encounter when I discuss ODSI with people. I thought that if we recorded a discussion and we made it available online, it would be a good introduction to the ODSI curious. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this with me today. First, could you introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me and for the discussion. So my name is Alain Alameddine. I live in Lebanon. I'm a member of a political party in Lebanon that's called Citizens in a State that also supports the establishment of a secular and democratic Palestinian state in Palestine. And that proposes also the existence of a secular state in Lebanon instead of the sectarian, strange system that we have here. And I'm also a coordinator for the One Democratic State Initiative, which is a Palestinian political organization that also seeks to center the narrative on the solution, the establishment of a one democratic state in Palestine.
Okay, well, talking about one democratic state in Palestine, one democratic state in Palestine. What is the vision of ODSI, and what is, most importantly, a one democratic state vision?
Okay, so the vision of the ODSI is actually the Palestinian vision. It has been so since before the Nakba, so since 80 years or more. Palestinians have always proposed the establishment of one democratic state in Palestine, so a state for all its citizens. Basically, this is based on an analysis of what the actual problem is in Palestine. Most of the time, because we see the violence, we see the apartheid, the occupation, and now, of course, the genocide, we tend to focus on this as a problem. ODS posits that the violence that is happening is not the root problem, it's only a symptom of the problem. And it posits that the actual root issue in Palestine is the existence of a settler colonial state. So this concept of creating a state that defines itself as Jewish, that privileges Jewish, that ethnically cleanses non-Jews from their land, that gives grants Israeli citizenship to any Jew in the world, that the distribution of capital and wealth is in favor of Jews over non-Jews. Obviously, the violence, the different roads, even the internet connection is different between Jews and non-Jews. For example, in the West Bank, obviously the siege of Gaza that's been happening for close to 20 years, and so on. All of these are manifestations of the root problem, which is having a state of Jewish supremacy, which is the basic concept of Zionism. ODS is the complete opposite of this. So instead of viewing people as belonging to national groups and believing that these national groups each have their own rights that excludes others, having a democratic state means having a state that treats its citizens as citizens, that respects the right of each citizen to have their own religion, culture, identity, but that does not grant or deny privileges on the basis of identity.
Yeah, well, I think we are so formatted into this vision of nation states. And I think there's a lot of apprehensions that a Palestinian state would be just as exclusionary as the Israeli state is right now with its Jewish exclusivity. So how would you address that fear?
Yes, that makes the question makes sense. The concept of having a democratic state, we're talking about having a Palestinian state, but the word Palestinian does not exclude anyone. Just like I believe you're in Canada and you're a Canadian, the fact that you are of Palestinian origin does not mean that you're not Canadian. The word Canadian does not exclude whatever background, religion, ethnicity, culture, or identity you have. Similarly, the word Palestine, it doesn't exclude people. There have been for thousands of years Palestinian Jews. So Palestine refers to a certain territory. And this is, just like maybe any other state in the world. On the other hand, maybe what happens is that people compare Palestine to Israel. The word Israel is a religious word. It's taken from religious books, and it is used as a state that defines itself as the nation state of the Jewish people only. So we're not talking about a Palestinian state that is the nation state of the non-Jews only. Palestine just refers to this territory, and actually there are many Palestinians of non-Palestinian origin. So for example, in Palestine, there are Palestinian Kurds, Palestinian Armenians, Palestinian Circassians. And when Jews left Europe and came as refugees to our land, there were Palestinian Jews in addition to the Palestinian Jews who already lived there. For example, in Gaza, there was a Jewish quarter. What prevented these Jews from becoming Jewish Palestinians as well is actually Zionism. Zionism has a lot in common with Nazism. So if we go back to Nazism, one of the many issues of Nazism was that instead of treating Jewish German citizens as German citizens, it treated them as Jews. So this is apartheid. They were treated as apart from their societies. Zionism did the same. By telling German Jews, you're not German, your home is Israel, it actually repeated the same pattern of putting or setting Jews apart from their societies. And it did the same in Palestine. It set Jewish Palestinians apart from their Palestinian society. And this is what created a wall that prevented new Jewish Palestinians from just becoming full Palestinians, just like the Circassians, the Kurds, the Armenians, and others. And ODS is actually the answer to that. When we speak of a Palestinian state, it's just like in Germany, the opposite of Nazism would have been just having a German state where people are free to be Jewish or Catholic or atheist or whatever. We are proposing the same in Palestine. And again, this is not the vision of the ODSI. This has been the vision of the Palestinian people since before the Nakba and after the Nakba.
Thank you. Still sticking in my mind is how we were raised into this idea of nationalism. And I think a lot of people, their easiest way to grasp a one democratic state of Palestine is to grasp it under the idea of binationalism. Could you say a few words about that? Because that's not what it is, right?
No, it's not what it is. The concept of binationalism accepts the Zionist or Nazi or other visions or other racist and identitarian visions that Jews should remain separate. And this is very dangerous. I mean, it's very dangerous to whoever is weakest. When Jews were weaker than the Nazi state, it was dangerous to them. And today that Palestinians, like in Gaza, are weaker than the Israelis, it is dangerous to Palestinians. So what we are proposing is not to try and accommodate this concept of having two different nations, one that is exclusively Jewish and one that is exclusively non-Jewish. We're trying to get beyond this whole concept of identitarian nations and just have one society. So we're not talking about merging two different nations. We're talking about just having one society where each individual is free to worship or whatever.
Thank you. So why do you think it's important to talk right now in the middle of what's happening? Why do you think it's important to talk about one democratic state?
Yeah, I can understand that people feel the urgency of talking only about the genocide, but the problem if we do not tackle the root issue of genocide is that we will only end this particular manifestation of settler colonialism. So it's like someone having cancer, and instead of talking about the cancer and the solution to the cancer, we just see that, oh, their temperature is up. So let's try and get their temperature down. It may succeed at getting the temperature down, but it will not solve the root issue. So we're not saying we should stop talking about the genocide, but we should talk about the genocide and ending it as a step toward ending the virus that caused it, which is colonialism. This helps with many things. First of all, it helps us as Palestinians have a clear discourse. So instead of talking sometimes about two states, sometimes about binationalism, sometimes about confederacy, sometimes about just ending the apartheid, and then every time the Israelis propose something, we need to think about whether we agree or not. And sometimes we end up seeing division. So for example, a year and a half ago, when there was the anti-occupation bloc by Israelis, some Palestinians sided with it, others sided against it, and we had infighting. Like we were, and this doesn't make sense. We are the colonized. We should have a vision for liberation, and it's the Israelis who should be divided among themselves as to whether they accept or refuse it. So this is one thing. All liberation movements in history had a clear objective in mind, and so should we. It also helps because it delegitimizes Zionism. And the main pretext that Zionism gives for its survival and for the survival of the settler colonial state is saying that if we Jews do not genocide the Palestinians, they will genocide us. This has never been the Palestinian vision, but it's important to make that clear. So we as Palestinians know that we just want to end the supremacy, but Zionism claims that it's not the case. And the Israelis facing us, they need to know that it's not the case. So this is also one reason why we need to make it clear. And third, it makes it clear who our real allies are. So for example, today we have, for example, the King of Saudi Arabia, who pretends to be a friend of Palestine, saying that he's willing to normalize with Israel if the two-state solution, they call it a solution, happens. So when we as Palestinians don't have a clear vision, it paves the way for fake allies to claim to be our allies. But when we have a clear vision for the dismantling of the colonial structure and the establishment of a democratic state, then our enemies, like the King of Saudi Arabia, need to either say, I side with a democratic state, or they need to say, no, I side with Israel. So for all of these reasons, we as Palestinians and those who side with us, our Arab or non-Arab allies, need to be very clear what they really want to see. They want to see the end of cancer, the de-Zionization of Palestine, including the de-Zionization of the Jewish population in Palestine.
Okay. I think this also has to do with this clarification on the direction and having our allies either declare themselves with or obviously against. It also declares who is supporting a movement, a global movement against the politicization of identity or not. And in that frame of mind, is there is the idea behind ODSI and the depoliticization of identity broader than just for Palestine? Is it some kind of hope for the future globally?
Absolutely. I think that people in general do not realize where, as humankind, we are heading. So, as I was saying, Zionism is based on the concept of politicizing identity. So claiming that Jews have rights as Jews and not as citizens of their society, but as a collective group that sets them apart from their own society, as I was saying. So this is just one way of politicizing identity. There are many others. And even when they are not colonial, they are also very dangerous. So I will give a few examples. Where I live in Lebanon, instead of having a state of its citizens, we have sects, and each sect is represented in parliament as a sect. So like this is very much in common with Zionism and being represented as Jews or having Jewish rights, Jewish collective rights. And the result is that we have had 2 civil wars, and they never really ended. Like the physical violence ended, but we are still, to go back to your concept of binationalism, we're still like multinational or multi-confessional. And the result is that we view each other politically as members of tribes. And this is very dangerous because identity is what sets us apart from each other. And the moment this is politicized, it is inherently belligerent. It is inherently exclusive or exclusionary, and violence becomes just a matter of time. So in Lebanon, we have this multi-confessional system. I could give example about really almost any society in the world. For example, in Sudan, the British colonial forces politicized all kinds of identities. Like they pit Arabs against Africans, Muslims against Christians, and tribes against each other. The result was that eventually there was an Islamic state there. So this is also one way of politicizing identity, which is having an Islamic state. But then in the south of Sudan, Christians felt excluded, obviously, because identity is what sets us apart. And they wanted a state of their own, a Christian state. Eventually, they had it several years ago, but because their state was, and their like political vision was identitarian, this concept of us against them persisted. But now that them was no longer the Muslims because they had their independence from the Muslims, them became the other tribe. And ever since South Sudan took its independence, it has been engulfed in an intertribal civil war. So what next? Yani, will they divide South Sudan into tribal mini states? And then
exactly.
what?
It's a regression that never ends, and that bypasses the discussions about how we want to live together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's at the basis of it is it's really a vision of humankind. Yani, obviously there are differences. Muslims are different from Christians, white people are different from black people, and so on. There is a difference that's there. The question is, does this difference imply violence? Or is the violence caused by political programs that politicize this identity? This question is very important. If the violence originates from different identities, then Nazism and Zionism are right. You know, you're Jews, we're not, so leave. We are Jews, you're Palestinians, so leave. Or like in Sudan, we're Christians, you're Muslims, so leave. And we're different tribes, so leave. What we are saying is that identities in themselves do not necessarily cause a political confrontation. It's having political movement that politicize it that cause this violence. And this is why the concept of having secular states, it would have solved the problem in Germany, and solves it in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Sudan. Even like in India, we just recently had a citizenship law that segregates against Muslims. A few years ago in the US, there was a poll among voters during the last elections in 2022 in 2020, I'm sorry, that where almost half of voters said that the US should split in two depending on whether one is pro-life or pro-choice. So like the US is heading towards the kind of civil war we had in Lebanon. Even the rise of the extreme right that we've just seen in Europe. All of these projects are different manifestations of politicizing identity. And the antithesis to this is a solution for all of mankind.
Thank you. Thank you. When it comes specifically to Palestine, I was in a meeting the other day talking about ODSI, and the feedback I got is, sure, Palestinians can talk about ODS all they want, they can determine their vision, but we as allies don't have a word to say about this. Could you please give me your 2 cents on this matter?
Yes, definitely. I think the issue is there's nothing particularly special about the number 2 or the number 1. You know, like the expression in English that you just used, can you give me your 2 cents? It could have been, give me your 1 cent. You know, this is for you Anglophones to decide. Okay, it's not my business. But 2 states or 1 state, it's not the same. The expression 2-state solution, it's a euphemism to talk about the occupation of Palestine. So to go back to the Nazis, when the Nazis were occupying France, they actually occupied the northern half of France. And it was called the occupation of France. It wasn't called the 2-state solution. And obviously, if I was a Mexican living then, I would have said, I support the liberation of France. I don't support the occupation of half of France. It's that easy. Now, whether France after liberation is going to be a parliamentary republic or a monarchy or whatever, this is for French people to decide. But when it comes to occupation and colonization, I mean, people who say that they want to see a free Palestine, they're not interfering with our right to self-determination. They are just wishing us well. Another point is that for the Palestinian people to be able to self-determine, they need the democratic state. I mean, obviously, how else are we supposed to practice or exercise a right of self-determination without a democratic state, under a non-democratic state or a Jewish supremacist state? So the argument, sometimes it's used in good faith, sometimes not, but it's not really a correct argument. Finally, when people give their opinion, they're not imposing anything. So, for example, I have an opinion about the US. I don't think that the two-party authoritarian capitalist system in the US is a good thing. I think that they should have ODS in the US. They should have one democratic state instead of what they have. But I'm not putting a gun to their head. I mean, if they want to side with one of these two oligarchic capitalist colonial parties, they can still do that. But I have my opinion, and I'm free to voice my opinion, and I'm free to voice it to Americans and, just tell them, this is what I think. And then they are free. So similarly, people have the right to say, I don't think there should be a supremacist state in Palestine. I think there should be a democratic one. They're not interfering with anything, particularly when we consider what I was just saying about how politicizing identity is dangerous for all societies. So to go back to the example about almost half of US voters wanting the US to split in two, this is a two-state solution, but applied to the US. So we all, Palestinians and allies, need to denormalize this concept of splitting and partitioning societies based on identity. We need to stand against it in Palestine, in the US, and everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So in a few words, let's move back to the One Democratic State Initiative per se. In a few words, can you tell me what is the mission of ODSI?
Yes, the mission is what we've been doing since the beginning of the book. The mission is to reclaim the narrative and to center it on the solution, the transition from settler colonialism to a secular democracy.
It's hard to talk about the solution, like we mentioned earlier on, but it is important.
I think we can figure out ways to do this in a smart and engaging ways.
I think so too. What motivated you to start the ODSI? Where does it come from? Who, where, when?
Me personally, or the initiative, or both?
Both.
Okay, so maybe it's good to, can I give some historical background?
Be my guest.
Okay, so the concept of ODS started since before the Nakba. Even when the British were still occupying Palestine, there was this question about what next, because unlike other countries in the world, we had a mass migration of mainly European Jews to our land. So there was the question of what happens after the British leave. And this is where ODS came from. We can just have a democratic Palestinian state, and they would be full-fledged citizens. And even like well-known people like Shimon Peres or Golda Meir, they were Palestinians at that time. And they could have remained Palestinians if they hadn't chosen to kill us and establish a state exclusive to them instead. So later on, after the Nakba, what one would expect some kind of violent reaction saying, okay, we wanted you to stay there, but now that you Nakba'd us, you're no longer welcome. But very amazingly, this didn't happen. So the Palestinian National Charter in its first and second version said that they wanted a democratic state on all of Palestine, and spoke about the possibility of Jews staying there if they wanted to remain as full-fledged citizens. So it explicitly stated that Jews could remain, unlike, the propaganda. And all of the main Palestinian factions clearly said, we want a secular and democratic state. Fatah in the Popular Front, in the Democratic Front, even in other smaller groups. And this remained the Palestinian vision throughout the 60s and the 70s, until eventually the Israelis and their colonial allies started having the upper hand. So they won war after war. They did their concentration camps of Palestinians. They partitioned Palestine. And eventually their Arab allies, who also sided with them, managed to overpower the Palestinian resistance factions and forced them to drop ODS and to adopt a racist vision for two states, which was signed at Oslo. So at that point, for the first time, there was a different vision, which is the Zionist vision for two states that seeped in a Palestinian political leadership. It didn't really seep in the popular view, like the Palestinians resisted. And this is incidentally when Hamas and Islamic Jihad took up arms, because before that, they were not resistance groups. They were just, we had the Islamic Brethren, which was just a social group teaching Quran, teaching reading, offering social services. It wasn't even a political group. It became so when the official leadership dropped ODS. Mm-hmm. So for all of those who condemn Hamas, here you go. Then it was obviously very hard for Palestinians because, like, we felt, I was only like 8 at the time, but it was, for those a bit older, it was like a historic defeat. Mm-hmm. Eventually what happened is that South Lebanon was liberated, and this gave hope because for the first time, we saw how a whole land had been liberated without concessions. And this infused like there is hope. And after that, two things happened. On one hand, the armed resistance picked up with the Second Intifada. And on the other hand, ODS was revived. And so starting in 2004, Palestinians started talking about ODS again, some of them in the factions that used to support ODS before Oslo was imposed on us, and others who were outside the factions. They started talking about it again. And groups started to spring up. So there was a group in Syria, a group in Lebanon, a group in Ramallah, a group in Haifa, a group in Jaffa, another in Dallas, in Houston, in Zurich, in Belgium. And discussions started again, and ODS started to be revived. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. There were several meetings, one of them in Istanbul several years ago, but several issues needed to be fleshed out. For example, the question of whether this would be a secular state or a binational one was not fleshed out. And there was this, sometimes I feel the left is obsessed with division, but sometimes I feel it's obsessed with unity. So instead of having clear groups that either support binationalism or that support having a state of all its citizens, people kind of dropped these discussions. They thought, let's focus on what we have in common. But the problem is that they didn't have enough in common to form single groups. And so there was infighting. Of course, we are Arab men, so we have our fragile egos also. So that didn't help with unity or such efforts. And obviously there was infiltration by people who sided with the Ramallah Authority or with other groups. So these attempts were not very fruitful. Well, they were fruitful because they got the discussion going. That's actually a more it wasn't fully fruitful, let's say this.
It didn't take it to the finish line, but it's a good thing to have emergence over and over again. It shows that there's a will, that there's a movement and energy that's going towards that. Sure, many attempts, but probability would have it that the more times you try, the more you're likely to succeed. So it's a good thing that people came before.
Absolutely. I give two examples. It even succeeded at fleshing out the start of a discourse. So, for example, there was the Munich Declaration that tried to pinpoint what ODS was. There was also the declaration of the One Democratic State campaign that also tried to do the same. And this was a very good start. So there were discussions based on these. I agree with this point, I disagree with that point, and it got something going on. One of the other issues with these groups is that they were mainly preaching to the converted. So like they spoke to each other, or they were limited to academic circles, like there would be a book or a conference. But I mean, how many Palestinians read these books? So in this sense, there was more to be done. A number of Palestinians and other Arabs were looking. And so to talk about me personally, about 2 years ago, I was becoming aware of, like I had reached ODS as a conclusion. I had noticed that had been the historical Palestinian vision. I had come to understand how politicizing identity was a danger for the world. And I felt there is the party I'm in, Citizens in the State for Lebanon, but what is there for Palestine? Is there an organized group doing something for Palestine? And it was 5 friends, Palestinians and Lebanese, and I were wondering about this. And we thought, okay, we're going to look for a Palestinian ODS group and join it. And we met all these groups. As I said, most of them were inactive. Like we would email, but they would never email back, or the last post was like 2 years ago, or stuff like that. Or we would contact their phone numbers, but the phone number was old, or nobody would reply. But along the road, we met a number of individuals who were on the same path as us. So they were older, so like they had already done their thing, and they were looking for what to do. And what happened is that we gathered each other up. We had become like maybe 20 at the time. And we thought, okay, let's create an initiative that is not one more group that is exclusionary of others, but that welcomes everyone who agrees with the basic vision to get to work. And so this is how the initiative was created, from people that are in other ODS groups or that are in no ODS groups. And it had this double advantage of one having a clear discourse. So instead of avoiding binationalism, resistance, secularism, it being a Palestinian state and so on, we confronted these issues head on and we proposed something. And also the name is an initiative, so it is focused on mobilizing people. So this is how the initiative started in early 2023.
Early 2023, so it's pretty young still.
Yep.
How's the progression been so far?
I think it's amazing. We have I was just checking the number of sign-ups yesterday. We are 1,600 sign-ups. I think this is very, I'm not talking like about people who support. There are much more than that who support it, but people who actually took the time to give us their email address or their phone number, what they do when they were born, what their name is, where they live, and so on. So this is very interesting. It's very promising. Again, the numbers mean nothing if there is no activity. So the activity that's been happening is, I think it's very encouraging. So for example, we had organized regular meetings in Gaza. Obviously now we don't, but we had them until the genocidal war started. There is an organized presence in not only in Palestine, but also in Jordan and in Lebanon. Also in France, Belgium, the UK, the US, Canada, and several countries in Latin America. So that's also, I think it's very promising. The number of Israeli signups is very encouraging. There are over 70 Israeli signups.
Oh, that's good.
Which shows that sometimes people say, don't talk about a Palestinian state because the Jews will be afraid. It's not true. That when we make it clear that we're not excluding anyone, I mean, we do have these signups, and several of them are active. For example, we have a Hebrew page that they play an active role in, and that reaches thousands of Israelis every week.
And it's not watered down. It does state we need to dismantle Israel and the settler colonialist state. It's
absolutely
clear. There's no misunderstanding. There's no trying to hold hands and normalize. It is clear, and people still sign up.
Absolutely. I think that actually this radicalness is inviting, because people want something radical. I mean, Zionism is a radical colonial movement, and to face it, we need a radical democratic movement. If it's not radical, to go back to the cancer analogy, it's like if I have cancer and you give me a couple of pills for headaches, I'm not really interested. I want a real treatment.
Yep.
So I think that this is, I think this is what we actually need. For example, to talk about like the kind of efforts we do, or the kind of accomplishment we've reached. For example, we penned a declaration. We called it a Declaration for Tomorrow's Palestine, that explains in more details than we previously did what does it mean to have a Palestinian state, to have a democratic state, to have a secular state. What do all of these concepts mean? How would they affect society living there? What does it mean in terms of citizenship? What is our stance on the armed resistance, and so on? Over 20,000 Palestinians signed this declaration and counting. It includes even well-known Palestinians like Salah, who is one of the founders of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's only surviving founder. So there is a lot of potential. A few weeks ago, we had a meeting in France with our allies, a conference, and more than 1,500 people were in attendance. It was a surprise. We had only printed 800 declarations. We were not expecting that many people. So there's a lot going on. Obviously, in the US and Canada, we also have a growing number of allies, and we have a very high number also of supporters in Jordan, which is currently getting organized and mobilized under a regime that sides with Zionism. So it's not an easy task, but it's happening.
One thing that comes up in the questions, and that I think is fun, as people ask, who's behind the initiative? Is there anybody known, anybody notable? And is there, Alain?
Somebody notable? Not really.
Not really.
It's very hard for notable people to openly side with a counter-hegemonic movement. Like what we're saying is different from what almost all of the Palestinian political leadership is saying. So it's really not easy to like do that. It's also different from what local Arab regimes are saying. So it's also it's hard for people who are already well known, so who have a lot of social capital, to put this capital to in danger, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So many notable people support us, but they do so in private. So, for example, in Lebanon, when I talk to many people who are like ardent ODS supporters, they say, yes, of course, that this is what we side with, but they won't say it out loud. So what we are working to do is because we're not trying to recruit people, we're trying to, on the other, it's in the other direction, we're trying to get people to talk about ODS. What we're doing is that we are it's one of the initiative's efforts, having discussions with these notable people and trying to get them to talk about ODS. So for example, a few weeks ago, we were in a meeting with Osama Hamdan, who is the Hamas representative. And we asked him, isn't it time to start talking about ODS again? And he explicitly said, yes, it is. And the recording is available online. And he says very clearly, we don't want to throw Jews in the sea. We don't want to genocide Jews. We want a Palestinian state from the river to the sea where anyone can remain as Palestinian citizens, regardless of their religion. So this is an example. There's the meetings we've had with Salah, whom I've mentioned, meetings we've had with other Palestinian leaders like Mustafa Barghouti, who also supports ODS. We were talking with Ghassan Abu Sitta a few years ago. He also supports ODS. So we're working to make this public, more and more public.
Yes. So
as for
notable people who support ODS are being asked to, be vocal about it. But the people behind ODSI are just regular people with conviction who wanted to organize and put the ODS back on the table, back in the public discourse, back in the political imaginary. So?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So it's a grassroots movement. So among the people behind it is me, you, Najil Khatib, Hamad Zraif, who is well known for his videos from Gaza, and other people that you can see on our recordings on YouTube. There's even a section called ODS supporters or Da'imut Tarh in Arabic. We also regularly write articles, so you can see the articles on our website. And whenever anyone signs up and ticks the box that they might be willing to help, the coordinator in their area contacts them. So yeah, we are happy to meet people to e-meet people and have face-to-face exchanges with them.
Good. The ODSI is very important. It's important to talk about it now. What do you think were the good moves so far? I personally am very fond of the letter to our Jewish allies and the declaration for tomorrow's Palestine. I think those really went out into the world to reach people. Is there some perhaps less bombastic letters or articles that you think were a good move, that did a good job, that did a good outreach?
So these were the most bombastic of our writings. What are the other good moves? I think one of the main good moves is it doesn't show, but we've put ODS back on the table. I mean, if you look up references to one democratic state over the past year or year and a half, they are literally more than the references we've had since Oslo, or since like the beginning of the internet up until 2023. It's literally that much. So it's back on the table. So for example, Azmi Bshara is launching an initiative to rejuvenate the PLO. And in his paper, he says, we will not take a stand either with one state or two states. So, okay, he doesn't want to take their stand.
But one state is in there.
Sorry?
But one state is in there. He doesn't take a stand, but one state is in there.
It's the first time that in a paper of such importance, someone actually has to say, we don't want to take a stand with one or two states. Before, two states was a given, and nobody would talk about one democratic state. So now this is a change in the discourse. The number of well-known people who are talking about it, supporting it, has also increased. Like we're seeing even European ministers, as I said, Ghassan Abu Sitta, Kareem Mukhayber, who resigned from the UN last year, a growing number of academics, and it's even in like everyday talk among Palestinians. Even a quick Facebook or Twitter search will show you that every hour someone is talking about one democratic state. Really, give it a try in English and Arabic. It's fascinating. So I think that this is something we've succeeded at doing, which is, again, as I was saying, this is our mission, to reclaim the narrative and to center it on the solution. I think
And
this is our biggest accomplishment, our biggest non-bombastic accomplishment. The biggest accomplishments are generally not bombastic anyway.
yes, absolutely. When it comes to criticism, there was some resistance, there was criticism. What's been the main feedback and criticism so far? And how would we respond to that?
Okay. So interestingly, and depending on the audience, this might be a surprise. Palestinians don't talk about genociding Jews. So we've never, ever had a Palestinian tell us, no, I don't agree with this. I want to kill Jews. Never. Zero. It's happened 0 times. So this is not an issue at all. I mean, unlike what maybe I don't know how affected people are by the propaganda against us and saying that ODS is a fringe movement. It's absolutely not a fringe vision. So this is not one of the obstacles we're facing. Other obstacles we are facing among Palestinians, it's the fact that most of them live under oppressive regimes. So some of them live in the 48 territories where they can barely speak up about Gaza. Some of them live in the West Bank, where the Ramallah Authority is just a tool of the Israeli state. Some of them live in Jordan. So between all these, we're talking about more than half of Palestinians in the world who live under regimes that openly are Zionist regimes. So this has been our biggest hurdle. It's very hard to organize under occupation. We're relying on the internet. Many of them work anonymously because they cannot work openly. It's slow, but it is progress. So this has been our biggest obstacle. Another lesser obstacle is that we have no funding. We are self-funded and we refuse to accept funding from states or political movements, obviously. So we rely fully on individual funding. So this, of course, limits the scope of what we can do. So, for example, we use paid advertisements to reach Israelis because there's really no way we can reach them. It's very limited how much we can reach them. We cannot, like our Arabic page, our Arabic Facebook page has 36,000 followers. Our Hebrew page has 0, literally 0 followers. So it's hard to reach them if we don't have this paid advertising. So this is one obstacle. Another criticism is that it's not realistic.
Yeah, they always say it's utopian, whatnot.
Yeah, utopian. Yeah, so it's, I mean, if genocide is realistic, yeah.
No.
I mean, I think if we were living 100 years ago, Zionism wouldn't have been realistic. At the time of Herzl, like 150 years ago, him, talking to his friends in Europe and saying, let's gather millions of Jews and create a state in Palestine or Argentina. They didn't mind.
That sounds like a wacko idea. Yeah.
It was completely utopian, but they got organized and they made it work. And all of the liberation, all of the successful liberation movements in history, all of the successful revolutions in history were utopian before they succeeded. Lenin said a few years before the Russian Revolution that he thought he would never see the revolution in his lifetime. We were talking to anti-apartheid South African militants a few months ago, and I asked them, how did you keep up hope? How did you have hope that you would succeed? And they laughed and they said, who said we had hope? We fought despite not having hope. So, but it worked. I mean, who would have thought in 1859 that a few years later slavery would be abolished in the US, and so on? Who would have thought in 1940 that Hitler would be would have to commit suicide. So it's really not about what's utopian, it's about what we want.
Yes, and how we're taking action towards it.
Yeah.
When it comes to people saying like, don't talk about it right now because, you know, we're gonna fight over it. Like it's gonna divide us.
Yeah. There are obviously different political visions. That's absolutely normal. I mean, there's no society in the world where 99% of people have the same political vision for the future of their country, or even 50. I mean, I don't know how many. I mean, if we take the most like relatively democratic states in the world, I don't think there are 50% of Germans or French or Mexicans or whatever who support actually the. So it's absolutely normal for there to be different visions among Palestinians. The issue is, if we have different political objectives or opinions, does it mean we are divided? Not necessarily. If we talk about it, we can find common grounds and agree on where to agree and agree on where to disagree. If we don't talk about it, then we are divided, not by different political opinions, but by refusing to be vocal about them and refusing to discuss them. So we have never refused discussing ODS with Palestinians or Israelis or others. We want to have this discussion. Refusing to discuss because discussing is what's going to divide us absolutely makes no sense. It's the political version of the silent treatment. It doesn't work. And if we postpone this discussion, like what next? Yani, what will happen to all these Palestinian movements that don't take a clear stand? Let me give two examples. BDS and Hamas. They're very different, but they're Palestinian organizations. So BDS explicitly says, we don't want to side with one or two states. Hamas says in their charter, we want one state, but we're okay with two states. So one of them says none, and the other says both. So none of them take a clear stand. Okay. This is good because it helps them gather people. Like if I'm a one-stater or a two-stater, so if I support the colonization or I don't, I can be in BDS. So that's good for numbers. But what happens if in, say, 10 years, because of boycotting efforts and because of the armed resistance, Israel says, you know what, we've had enough of this, we're becoming internationally isolated, let's negotiate for real this time a two-state thing, and you can have a state on the borders of 67. What will happen to BDS then? It will implode because there are two different currents. The same will happen to Hamas. Some of them will say, but in this sentence, we said that we're against it. And the others will say, but in that sentence, we said that we are with it. And the best way to, the best favor you can do to Israel is by remaining divided, by refusing to engage over like a very clear vision for liberation, which is that we just want a Palestinian state and we want the opposite of Zionism. What we're suggesting is to simply agree on this basic platform, and then we can disagree about all the rest. So like I was saying, we can have a parliamentary republic or something else. We can discuss what kind of an industry or economy we want to have. There are so many within democracy. There are so many, there's such a large spectrum, and I'm sure that we'll have plenty to fight about in tomorrow's Palestine.
Exactly. So if someone wants to get involved with ODSI, how do they do that? What are the levels of involvement? How do they get in touch?
Okay, so the mission of the ODS Initiative is to reclaim the narrative and to center it on the solution. We do this at three main levels. One of them is media and social media. So for example, our website, its translation, our social media, the posts, the content, social networking, answering people who leave comments, sharing our content, contacting influencers, contacting the media in our region, writing op-eds, writing letters to the editors, and so on. So all of this media aspect is something that people can help with. Another aspect is working on the ground. So for example, holding events, taking part in protests, holding ODS banners at protest, handing out ODS flyers, putting stickers on the walls, anything that's linked to whatever is done on the ground. And a third kind of networking is political networking. So it means reaching out to political parties, political movements, pro-Palestinian groups, activists, students' movements, workers' unions, syndicates, and so on, to try and get them to not just stand with Palestine, but actually help reclaim the narrative and center it on a transition from Zionism to democracy. So everyone who supports ODS is encouraged to take part in one of these efforts. Of course, they can do this on their own, like they can talk about ODS and do their thing, or they can do it in a more organized way. So that's easy. They just need to sign up on our website and check the I would like to help box, and someone will email them. So the local coordinator will email them or message them over WhatsApp if they've chosen to share their WhatsApp number. And then they can discuss practical steps that they are willing to take. In terms of level of involvement, it's very simple. It's as much as you would like to. We try to focus on what people like to do. So like if you enjoy talking to people, if you hate talking to people, we can find something that you enjoy doing. If you enjoy content creating, graphic designing, if you have some kind of technical skills. But what we actually need most is political depth. So I would encourage people to also like really go through the website and go through like our YouTube channels or articles and really go in depth to grasp the underlying principles of ODS. This is what will really help them be effective supporters of the Palestinian cause.
And even as they go through the material, even if people don't want to officially sign up, if there's something that is not clear, that they have criticism or are holding back a little bit, they can write it down in the comments, and that will give us an opportunity to expand on it and to build that political depth, right?
Absolutely. We have teams set up to answer such comments on Instagram and Facebook. We used to have a team to do that on Reddit, but they banned literally all of our accounts. So don't be surprised if we don't answer on Reddit. And if they email us, we are also always happy to answer by email.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think we did a pretty good overview. Is there something else you'd like to share?
Something else I'd like to share?
Yeah.
There's a saying a political saying in my party in Lebanon. We say political imagination is an aspect of resistance. So let's not limit ourselves to what is happening today. Let us imagine tomorrow's Palestine, even beyond Palestine, tomorrow's world, a world free of capitalism, colonialism, all aspects of politicizing identities, all aspects of supremacies, and imagine a world of citizens. This is, people talk about peace, like this is the only way for peace. And for it to happen, we need to work for it. So, you were asking about the main obstacles we face. I think I didn't mention the main obstacle, actually. It's the main obstacle that all revolutionary political movements face. The system we live in, the colonial and capitalist system we live in, has taught us that there's nothing we can do. Politics are corrupt. The world has always been this way. There's nothing you can do. And, just do some activism and, send some donations to Gaza. We have become politically passive. I think this is the main obstacle we are facing. So my message to people would be not to believe the lie and to become politically active.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Yes. Let's imagine the future. Imagining is an act of resistance. Changing the limits of how we see the world, pushing them further. Yeah, that's changing the world little by little. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alain.
Thank you, Myriam.
And well, I'll see you soon, and I hope people will get to enjoy the information that was provided today.